Hi everyone, welcome to grammar lesson number 17. So today's lesson is going to be the last part of words to watch out for, which covers sets 57 through 50, and it's part 12. So because we only have one part today to do in our lesson, the lesson is going to be a bit shorter than usual since we usually cover two parts. So I apologize about that, but this is the last set of words to watch out for. So what we're covering today is, actually this should be part 12, sorry. But we have not, sort of, kind of, but rather, quite, or somewhat. So the way these are formatted, by the way, before I get into them, is I usually just have the words by themselves, and then we kind of go into what's right and what's wrong when we look into each set. But for this one, the pair of words or the word in the beginning is not correct. So that's why we always have not, and then the words following but are the correct set or words to use. So for number one, we have not, sort of, kind of, but rather, or quite and somewhat. We also have not, these, sort of, these, kind of, but this, sort of, this, kind of, or these sorts of, and these kinds of. So these differences will be easier to spot when I show you guys more example sentences and using them in actual context. And then for number three, we have not try and, but try to. And then fourth one we have is not a lot, but, not a lot or a lot. They're pronounced the same, but here we have a lot as one word and a lot, but much and many. So these will make more sense in context. So starting with number one, not, sort of, kind of, but rather, also quite and somewhat. Everyone says sort of or kind of to qualify a statement one is not entirely committed to. He's kind of nice. In formal English, substitute rather, quite, or somewhat. So if we say he's kind of nice, when we're saying kind of or sort of, it's not grammatically incorrect, it's just very informal. So especially you want to avoid using kind of and sort of in formal writings, papers, proposals, anything that you're handing in, anything that should be formal. You don't want to use sort of or kind of, but you should just be using rather or quite and somewhat. So here we have the sentence, that teacher is rather strict. So instead of saying that teacher is sort of strict or that teacher is kind of strict, you want to say rather. You could also say quite strict, somewhat strict. They're quite interchangeable, all three of these words here, because they have basically the same meaning in these contexts. For sentence number two, we have George was somewhat annoyed to find his lunch missing from the fridge. So if we're saying he's somewhat annoyed, it's the same meaning as saying he's sort of annoyed or kind of annoyed. So except that we're making the sentence more formal by saying somewhat. Sentence number two, not sentence number two. Rule number two is to not use these, sort of, these, kind of, but this, sort of, this, kind of, or these sorts of, and these kinds of. So just before we get into the explanations, just to differentiate them off the bat, when we have these, sort of, these, kind of, you can realize that the similarity between these two is that we have these as the first word in both, but the sort and kind word after are singular. However, when we do use these, we're supposed to be saying sorts or kinds. So you can say these sorts of, but not these sort of. And then you also have this, sort of, and this kind of. So if you're just going to say sort and kind as singulars, then you want to be using this and this sort of or this kind of rather than these sort of and these kind of. So it's not uncommon to hear someone say, I have trouble with these sort of math problems, but this/these is an adjective that must agree with the noun it modifies. In the example, the word these was used because problems is plural, but these doesn't modify problems. Figure out if you're talking about one sort or kind or more than one. So we have these correct sentences here. We have, I have trouble with this sort of math problem. Or you could say, I have trouble with these math problems, these sorts of math problems. And then we have Gorgonzola and Stilton are very smelly. Joey will not eat these kinds of cheese. So you're not going to say these kind of, because we have these indicating it's plural. We want to say these kinds of cheese. Rule number 3, we have not try and, but try to. So this one, in my opinion, is probably the most straightforward rule in this set because a lot of people just say try and, but instead of saying and, you want to replace it to. So in casual speech, it's normal to say, I'll try and have it done by tomorrow. But the speaker doesn't mean that he or she will both try and have as two separate objects. Use to have in this situation an infinite phrase to serve as the object, as a direct object of try. So if we're saying I'll try and have it done by tomorrow, that's really saying that you're going to try as one action, and the second action is you're going to have it done by tomorrow, because you're saying try and have as two separate actions as worded here. So instead you want to say try to, because if you're saying you're trying to do something, the only action is that you're trying. But if we're saying try and something, then you're going to say you're trying and you're doing something else. So this sentence, Benjamin did not even try to hear out her explanation. And then this sentence, she didn't try to accomplish her goal. So if we have try to in both of these sentences, we're basically saying that they're just trying. So in this case, if we had Benjamin did not even try and hear out her explanation, it wouldn't exactly work. But because we have try to in this sentence, we know that his only action being performed is him trying. And then the last rule is not a lot as one word, or a lot, a spaced lot, but much and many. So this one word form of quote unquote a lot simply doesn't exist, like the word it's. Also, just a little side note, if you ever see it's with an apostrophe after the S, that is not a word, just as this word here is not a word. The two word form a lot does exist and means a piece of real estate, a collection of objects for auction. It does not mean many, and it is not an adverb meaning much. We often hear sentences like these. A lot of my friends are going out to get bubble tea. I don't know a lot about Russian history, or she likes him a whole lot. So you want to get rid of a lot or find a substitute. So just to recap on this slide before we go on to the correct sentences of these, the correct forms of these sentences, when we're saying a space lot, we're talking about a piece of state, a real estate, or piece of land. We're talking about a lot. Basically the same thing, saying like a dog, you're talking about an animal. A pencil, you're talking about an object. If you're saying a lot, you're just talking about a space, or a piece of land, or a collection of objects. And then the one word, a lot, that is frequently used is just not a word. So you just don't use it because grammatically just does not exist in the English language. So similar to it's with an apostrophe after the S. So to substitute in for these wrong sentences, we have use of much and many. So we can say many of my friends are going out to get bubble tea, or you can say quite a few of my friends are going out, or a number of my friends are going out. And then we have I don't know much or a great deal about Russian history. So it could be I don't know much about Russian history, or I don't know a great deal about Russian history. And then the last sentence we have is she likes him very much. There's not much I can think of to substitute in this way, but if we just say she likes him very much, then it makes sense to say, to quantify how much you like someone rather than saying she likes him a lot. So that is the end for part, I'm not sure if it's, I'm pretty sure it's part 12, but I will double check on that. But I'm pretty sure it's part 12. So, oh, there's a little bit more for this rule. So what about any, most, all, none, and some? All of these are Amons, and when an Amons pronoun is the subject of a sentence, I'm going to go over what Amons is, by the way, in the next slide, and is modified by a prepositional phrase. The verb will be singular if the noun in the phrase is singular, in other words, a no-count noun, and plural if the noun in the phrase is plural, in other words, a count noun. So I reviewed count nouns and non-count nouns in my last lesson, so if you guys still have any confusion with that, I recommend that you look at that lesson to get a recap idea of what count nouns and no count nouns are, but they're pretty self-explanatory by their names. A count noun is something you can count. So coins, you can count, oh look, he has 5, 6 coins. And a no count noun would be something like trouble. If we're saying, oh, she's in so much trouble, you can't say, oh, how many troubles, 1, 2, 3. That doesn't apply in this sense. And just to go over what Amons is, I don't have the slide in. I believe I forgot to edit that in, but Amons really just here, any, most, all, none, and some. Sorry, I don't have it in the acronym list form, but you just have them here in bold if you guys want to refer to that. And then now we're going to be doing practice sentences, 4 words to watch out for, part 12. So for number 1, I sort of want to eat Mexican food instead of Japanese food for lunch. So the problem here is using sort of. If you say sort of or kind of, it's very informal English, so we would just say rather than. So I want to eat Mexican food rather than Japanese food for lunch. So here we are kind of rearranging the structure of the sentence or where the correct words go. But overall, it's just grammatically more formal to use rather than saying sort of or kind of. Sentence number 2, he promised he would try and let me borrow the book for tomorrow. So if we're saying try and, again, we're having try as one action and whatever follows the and as the second action. So in this sentence, we'd be saying the let me borrow is going to be happening because we're saying that he's going to try and do something. So instead of saying try and, the simple fix is to replace the and with to and say try to. So the correct sentence would read, he promised he would try to let me borrow the book tomorrow. Sentence number 3, a lot of birds were flying over the forest. It was hard to get a clear look at the sky. So again, we have the frequently misused one word a lot here, which again is grammatically incorrect. You want to say many, or you can also say much, but it doesn't work in this context. So here we would just say many birds were flying over the forest. It was hard to get a clear look at the sky. So again, a lot as one word does not exist. And then we have sentence number 4, these sort of fries aren't as tasty as greasy ones. So here again, if we have these sort of, we have sort as singular, similar to kind, but I'm just going to be using sort because that's what we have in this context. So instead of saying sort followed by following these, if we're saying these, we have to either have these sorts of or these kinds of, because these is indicating that something plural is going to be following it. So the simple fix is just to say these sorts of fries aren't as tasty as greasy ones. And just keep in mind, you can also say something like this kind of, but that doesn't work in this exact context. Sentence number 5 is this activity is kind of annoying Peter whined. So again, saying kind of, sort of is informal. You can replace kind of with somewhat here. You could also say rather if you wanted, or quite. They're pretty interchangeable. So here the correct sentence, or one of them, would just be this activity is somewhat annoying Peter whined. On the next slide, we have 5 more example sentences. So number 1 is, I will try and have these files on your desk by 12 p.m., Haley assured. So again, saying try and is indicating that you will try and do something. So instead of saying try and, you want to say try to. So the simple fix is, I will try to have these files on your desk by 12 p.m. And then sentence number 3, these kind of physics problems are the most confusing for me. So here we have these kind, like I said before, if we're saying these, we want something, oh sorry, I just realized I skipped number 2, but I'll come back to that. If we have these kind of physics problems, that doesn't make sense because we have these, so we need something plural. So we could either say these kinds or these sorts of physics problems. So because we're talking about, kind was already used, we're going to say these kinds of physics problems are the most confusing for me. So back to number 2, sorry I skipped that. It reads, she wishes she knew a lot more about how bubble tea is made. So here we have a lot being used in this sentence. And when we say a space lot, we're really literally just talking about a piece of land, a lot, like a noun. So that doesn't make sense. What we want to say is she wishes she knew more about how bubble tea is made, or a great deal about how bubble tea is made. Sentence number 4, after soccer practice, I feel sort of sleepy. Again, sort of and kind of is informal, so you can just say rather or somewhat or quite. They're all interchangeable, so here I just chose rather, so the sentence would read, so the sentence does read, after soccer practice, I feel rather sleepy. And then the last sentence is, a lot of my classmates don't review their notes after class, which is a bad study habit. So if we're saying a lot, this is the same problem that we have every time a space lot is used. We're talking about a literal piece of land. So then if you want to just quantify a large amount, you can say many of my classmates, or oh my gosh, I almost just made that mistake myself. You could say many of my classmates, a great deal of my classmates, a large portion of my classmates don't review their notes after class, which is a bad study habit. So again, just keep in mind that when you're using a lot, it's not to quantify anything. You want to say many, much, more, rather than a lot or the one word that doesn't exist. So that is all for words to watch out for as a series. So this was part 12, and this concluded I believe it was 1 through 50 sets of words to watch out for. So if you guys have any questions, do leave them. And thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week.